Chapter 013. Any second now. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as a sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. "Good morning, brother," an annoyingly cheerful voice sounded right on top of him. "Morning, morning, morning." Zorian growled as he roughly pushed Kiriel away from him. Fifth time. This was the fifth time the restart terminated after only a handful of days. How many times would Zack need to die before realizing he should back off for a while and try again later? Honestly, Zorian would have reconsidered his approach after the second attempt. He snatched his glasses from his bedpost and stomped off towards the bathroom before Kiriel could gather her wits. The short, irregular restarts were ruining every plan he cared to make, not to mention disrupting his concentration. He really couldn't do anything substantial while this was going on, other than browsing the library for helpful texts and hoping Zack would quit killing himself on a regular basis. What the hell was the boy trying to do anyway? He shouldn't get so worked up over it, though. After all, how much longer could this possibly go on for? 10, 15 restarts?
Yeah.
That sounded about right. Break. Hi, Roach. Zorian wordlessly gestured for Taven to come inside before slowly closing the door and shuffling after her. He could feel her impatience at his sluggish pace, but he paid it no heed. He was deliberately stalling, trying to decide what to do. He fully intended to have a chat with the weird telepathic spiders that inhabited the sewers, but it would be lunacy to go there at this point. There was no guarantee they would be as friendly as they were the last time, and their mind magic made them dangerous even within a time loop. He needed a way to protect his mind before venturing into Sayoria's underworld, and so far he had only found one ward that protected the caster's mind in the Academy archives. Unfortunately, that particular ward blocked everything related to the mind, mind-based communication spells included. He needed something more selective than that. But just because he was unwilling to descend into the dungeon didn't mean he was content to let Taven get herself killed by going there either. He wasn't sure why he cared, exactly. Pragmatically speaking, he shouldn't be bothered, since everything would be reset in a couple of days and she'd be fine again. Still, he was bothered, and since he was forced to have this conversation repeatedly every few days, he could as well find a way to talk her out of going. He didn't think for a moment it was going to be easy. Taven was possibly even more stubborn than Zack. "So, Taven, how is life treating you?" he began. So, she sighed. "I am trying to secure an apprenticeship, but it's not going all that well. You know how it goes. I got Nurthak to take me as his class assistant this year, so there is that. You wouldn't happen to have taken non-magical combat as one of your electives?" "Nope," Zorian answered cheerfully. "Figures," Taven rolled her eyes. "You really should have, you know. Girls dash. Love boys who exercise." Yes, nodded Zorian sagely. "Why are you here, Taven? You tracked me down here even though I only moved in yesterday and never told anyone which room here is mine. I suppose you used a divination to find me?"
Yeah,
Taven confirmed. "Pretty easy thing to do, really. Aren't these rooms supposed to have some sort of basic warding scheme placed on them?" Zorian inquired. "I'm pretty sure it's just rudimentary stuff like fire prevention and basic detection fields to warn the staff about fighting in the hallway and attempted demon summonings and whatnot," Taven shrugged. "Anyway, I'm here to ask you to join me and a couple of others on a job tomorrow." Zorian said nothing, patiently listening as she said her sales pitch. It was actually on Monday, not tomorrow. Taven's definition of tomorrow differed greatly from the standard definition, but other than that, she was actually fairly honest in her explanation of the situation. She even mentioned that there was a small chance they might encounter something very nasty in there, but emphasized that she and her friends were totally capable of confronting anything they may find there. Right. Anything? Asked Zorian suspiciously. You know, I happen to have read up on magical spider breeds, and they can be pretty powerful. A single gray hunter has been known to wipe out entire hunting parties of mages, and they're no larger than a human at their biggest. Phase spiders can literally jump on you out of nowhere and drag you off into their own private pocket dimension. Some of the breeds are even sentient and have mind magic at their disposal. The last one was a joke in more ways than one. Dungeon ecology was a giant mystery, even to mages that specialized in it, and information about monsters that made their home there was very scarce. As such, it was probably not surprising that he could find nothing on sentient telepathic spiders in the Academy library, even after conscripting Ibri and Kira Fischli on the effort. Was it just him, or was the Academy library a lot less useful than he had imagined it to be? Every time he tried to find something there he got disappointed. Then again, the things he was trying to find information on lately tended to be obscure, borderline illegal, or both. Oh please, Taven snorted dismissively. Don't be so paranoid. As if something like that could be right below Cyoria. We won't be delving into the dungeon's depths, for God's sake. I don't think you should go at all, Zorian insisted. I'm getting a really bad feeling about this. Taven rolled her eyes, an undercurrent of annoyance in her voice. Funny. I never took you for a superstitious guy. Time changes people, Zorian said solemnly, smiling at his private joke before straightening his features into a serious expression. But seriously, I'm getting a really bad feeling about this. Is this really worth getting yourself killed over? Apparently this was a wrong approach to take, as Taven's temper flared immediately. He supposed she perceived his comment as an insult towards her skills as a mage. Before he could apologize and rephrase his argument, she was already shouting at him. I'm not going to die. Taven shouted irritably. Gods, you sound just like my father. I'm not a little girl and I don't need to be protected. If you didn't want to come you should have just said so instead of lecturing me. She stomped off angrily, muttering to herself about conceited brats and wasted time. Zorian winced as Taven slammed the door behind her. He wasn't sure why she had reacted so strongly to his words, but apparently pointing out the potential danger of the job was ineffective and only pissed her off. Oh well, he didn't expect to succeed on the first try anyway. Break. Hi Roach. It is a good thing you came, Taven, Zorian said with a grave expression. Come in, we have much to talk about. Taven raised an eyebrow at his behavior before shrugging and sauntering inside. Zorian tried to project a serious, ominous presence about himself, but it seemed to amuse her more than anything. So, I gather you wanted to see me then, she asked. I guess you're lucky I decided to drop by, then? Not quite, Zorian said. I knew you would come today, just as I know you're here to conscript me into joining you for a sewer run. It's not a dash, Taven began, only to get interrupted by Zorian before she could gather steam. A sewer run, Zorian repeated. Retrieving a pocket watch guarded by some very dangerous spiders from the top layer of the dungeon under the city. Who told you that? Asked Taven after several seconds of bewildered pause. How could they possibly know? I told nobody where I'm going or why I'm visiting you. Nobody told me, Zorian said. I had a vision about this meeting, and about what will happen should you descend into the tunnels. Well, it was true in a way. A vision? Taven said incredulously, disbelievingly. Zorian nodded gravely. I have never told you this before, but I have prophetic powers. I receive visions of the future from time to time, seeing glimpses of important events that will affect me personally in the days ahead. It wasn't completely implausible, people like that did exist in the world, though their powers were quite a bit more limited than what he had at his disposal thanks to the time loop. From what he understood, their visions were less of a detailed recording of the future and more of a general outline of some upcoming event. The future was always changing, always uncertain, and trying to get a clear image of it was like trying to grasp a fistful of sand. The more you squeeze, the more things slip past your fingers. Unfortunately, while being prophetic was not impossible, Taven clearly wasn't buying his claim. "Oh really?" Taven said challengingly, crossing her arms in front of her chest. "And what did this vision of yours tell you about the job?" "That it will be the death of you," said Zorian bluntly. "And me as well, should I choose to follow you down there." "Please, Taven, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm serious about this. The visions are rarely as clear as they were this time around. I won't go down into the sewers and you shouldn't either." As seconds ticked past in silence, Zorian began to think she would actually listen to him. This impression was destroyed when she suddenly started laughing. "Oh, Roach, you almost had me there," she wheezed, breaking into uncontrollable chuckles after every couple of words. "Visions from the future. Roach, you have the funniest jokes. You know, I miss that quirky sense of humor of yours. Remember that one time you pretended you were asking me out?" How Zorian stopped himself from physically recoiling at that he would never know. She just had to mention that, didn't she? He forcefully pushed away the memories of that particular evening, determined not to dwell on it.
"Yeah,"
said Zorian emotionlessly. "What a funny guy I am. Why was he trying to save her again?" "So," she said, finally getting her giggles under control. "How did you know I was coming?" "Break." "Hi R-, Taven began, only to stop when she saw his vacant, hollow expression. "Whoa, Roach, what the hell happened to you?" Zorian kept staring off into space for a few more moments before shaking his head, as if to clear his thoughts a little. "Sorry," he said in a subdued voice, motioning her to get inside. "I just had an extremely vivid nightmare tonight and I didn't get much sleep." "Oh," Taven said, collapsing on his bed like usual. "What about?" Zorian gave her a long look. "Actually, you were in it." Taven stopped fooling around and gave him a shocked look. "Me? Why the hell would I be in your nightmare? You'd think a beautiful girl like me would automatically make for a pleasant dream. Now I got to know what it was about. I was walking through the sewers with you and some other two guys I never met," began Zorian in a haunted tone, "when we were suddenly set upon by a swarm of giant spiders. There were so many of them. They just swarmed over us and started biting and..." He took a couple of deep breaths, pretending to be on the verge of hyperventilating, before finally calming down. "I'm sorry, it was so real, you know," he said, giving Taven the most vacant stare he had. After a few moments he looked down on his trembling hands and balled them up into fists in a very visible motion. "The feeling of their fangs sinking into my skin, the poison coursing through my veins like liquid fire, they didn't even kill us in the end, they just wrapped us in spider silk and dragged our paralyzed bodies off to their lairs to feed upon later. Such a horrid, vivid vision, I don't think I'll ever look at a spider in the same light again." Taven shifted nervously where she sat, looking extremely uncomfortable and vaguely ill. "But it was just a nightmare," Zorian said in forced cheer. "To what do I owe this visit, anyway? Is there something you wanted to talk to me about?" "And no," Taven blurted out, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. I just stopped by to have a chat with one of my friends, that's all. How has life been treating you anyway? Aside from the whole nightmare thingy." She found an excuse to leave in a matter of minutes. He would later find out she went into the sewers anyway and never came back. "Break spiders?" asked Zorian, doing his best to appear alarmed. Taven, don't you listen to rumors from time to time? I've been pretty busy lately, Taven chuckled awkwardly. Why, what do the rumors say? That there are some mind magic using spiders prowling the city sewers, Zorian said. Word is the city is trying to root them out, but the creatures are evading them thus far. They've been trying to suppress the information, since it would make them look incompetent and all that. Wow, good thing I talked to you then, Taven said. I never would have thought to put a mind ward on myself before going down otherwise. You're still going down there? Zorian asked incredulously. What makes you think this mind ward of yours is enough? Mind magic is a subtle thing, Taven said. It uses tiny amounts of mana in very sophisticated ways, which makes it easy to counter with brute force. So long as you know in advance you're going to face a mind mage, it's easy to make yourself effectively immune. Trust me, now that I know what to expect from those crawlies, I won't fall for their tricks. Zorian opened his mouth to protest, but then reconsidered. Was Taven right? Maybe he was looking at things from the wrong perspective. He was trying to get Taven to survive, which didn't necessarily mean stopping her from going into the sewers. I guess, he finally conceded. But I won't be going with you. Oh, come on. Taven protested. I can totally keep you safe. Nope, Zorian insisted. Not happening. Find someone else to go with you. How about Dash? No fighting, Zorian interrupted. Look, there is no way to talk me into going along with this. Do tell me how the whole thing turns out afterwards, though. I don't want to have to check to see if you survived. She actually did visit him a few days later, telling him the sewer run was a failure as far as finding the watch went, but that nothing attacked them either. Huh. Maybe Benesek was onto something when he spoke so highly about the power of rumors and gossip. Break. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as a sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. Good morning, brother, an annoyingly cheerful voice sounded right on top of him. Good morning, Kiri, yelled Zorian back, engulfing the shocked Kiriel into a hug. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful day this is. Thank you for waking me up, Kiri, I really appreciate it. I don't know what I would do without my wonderful little sister. Kiri wriggled uncomfortably in his grasp, not used to receiving such a gesture from him and unsure how to react. Who are you and what did you do to my brother? She finally demanded. He just hugged her tighter. Break. Something I can do for you, Sunny? Asked Karen. The class has been dismissed, in case you haven't noticed. Yes, I've noticed, Zorian confirmed. I just wanted your advice about something, if you can spare the time. Karen impatiently gestured him to get to the point. I was wondering if you knew any means of countering mind magic, Zorian said. Well, there is your basic mind shield spell, Karen said carefully. Most mages agree that's all you need as far as mind magic protection goes. Yes, but that spell is a bit crude, Zorian said. I'm looking for something more flexible than that. Crude, yes, Karen agreed, suddenly becoming more interested in the conversation. Often useless, too. A simple dispel is enough to strip the protection off the target, and a proper mind mage will ensnare your mind before you even realize you're being targeted. Then why do most mages think it suffices? Asked Zorian. You know why most mind magic is restricted or forbidden? Karen asked. It was a rhetorical question, apparently, because Karen immediately launched into an explanation. It's because it's most commonly used to target civilians and other mostly defenseless targets. Most mind mages are petty criminals that use their powers on the weak-willed, and cannot be called a master of anything, let alone mind magic. It's rare for mages to encounter mind mages that know how to use their powers properly. Still, even a moderately talented mind mage can easily ruin your life, to say nothing of magical creatures with mind-affecting powers on their disposal. There are methods of dealing with mind magic without resorting to warding spells, but most find it easier to practice Mind Shield until it's completely reflexive and they can cast it on a moment's notice. Or just carry a spell formula for the spell on their person at all times. And these other methods are? Zorian prodded after he realized Kiran wouldn't say anything more. Kiran gave him a nasty smile. I'm glad you asked, Sonny. See, not too long ago, the combat magic class had a much more demanding curriculum, including what was called resistance training. Basically, the combat magic instructor would repeatedly cast various mind spells at students while they tried to fight off the effects. It was quite effective at making students innately resistant to common mind-affecting spells like sleep, paralyze, and dominate. Unfortunately, there were a lot of complaints from students who reacted particularly badly to it, and after a number of scandals where teachers and student assistants were discovered to have been using the training exercise as an excuse to punish students outside of proper channels, the practice was discontinued. An overreaction in my opinion, but I was overruled. Zorian stood in silence for a moment, trying to digest this information. Was that really the best way to deal with mind magic? He got what the idea behind it was. It worked on the same principle that shaping exercises and reflexive magic did, burning the defense procedures into his soul the same way repetitive movements burned certain reactions into muscle memory. It just sounded so mindless. And probably very painful. That's when he noticed Kiran was giving him a very predatory look. How about it, Sonny? Kiran asked. You think you have what it takes to go through it? I've been wanting to revive the practice for some time now, to be honest. I promise I'll go easy on you. He lied. The very first spell he cast on Zorian was the Nightmare Vision spell. Whatever the spiders had to say, it better be worth it. Break. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as a sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. Good morning, brother, an annoyingly cheerful voice sounded right on top of him. Morning, morning, morning. Zorian took a deep breath and focused on the image of what he wanted to achieve until it was so real he felt he could almost touch it. Billowing streams of mana erupted from his hands, invisible to the naked eye but easily felt by his senses. A mage could always feel his own mana, especially while in the process of shaping it. In little more than a second, everything was ready and he set the effect loose on the little pest lying on top of him. Nothing happened. Zorian opened his eyes and let out a long frustrated hiss. This was no structured spell he had been attempting, but pure unstructured magic. Specifically, he had been trying to levitate Kiriel off of him by using the basic levitation exercise. He knew such an attempt would be much harder to accomplish than levitating a simple pen over his palm, but nothing? That tickled, Kiriel said. Were you trying to do something? Zorian narrowed his eyes at her. Okay, that was a challenge. Break. What can I do for you, Mr. Kaczynski? Ilsa asked. Normally I'd assume you are here to complain about Svim, but you haven't even had a single session with him yet. Zorian smiled brightly. That was the one bright spot in this series of short restarts. They always happened before Friday, so he didn't have to deal with Svim while they lasted. Actually, I'm here to ask for advice on a personal project, Zorian said. Do you know a training regimen that will allow me to lift a person telekinetically without casting a structured spell? Ilsa blinked in surprise. As in, using pure shaping skill? Why would you ever have a need for that? I sort of ran out of shaping exercises after mastering everything in Empatins Expanded Basics, said Zorian. It seemed like an interesting project. All 15 of them? Ilsa asked incredulously. Instead of answering, Zorian decided to demonstrate. He picked up a particularly large and heavy book from Ilsa's table and made it spin in the air above his palm. Spinning a book like that was actually much harder than spinning a pen, because a book was a lot heavier than a pen and had a tendency to snap open unless a mage used magic to force the covers shut while it was being levitated. That particular trick was something he was taught by Ivory, of all people. She claimed that being able to keep a book shut while levitating it was a must-have for some of the spells she intended to teach him. Unfortunately, it took a couple of weeks for Ivory to warm up to him and decide to teach him seriously, and he didn't have that in these short restarts. He made the book glow ominous red after a while. Using pure shaping skills to spin a book in the air while keeping it shut and making it glow with colored light was a pretty impressive showing from a third year, and should be ample evidence of his skills. Ilsa took a deep breath and leaned back in her chair, obviously impressed. "Well," she said. "Your shaping skills certainly aren't lacking. Still, hovering a person without a spell is not really something there is a manual on. Nobody does it, as far as I know. If they have a need for on-the-spot levitation, they just carry an appropriate focus on their person at all times. Rings, usually, since they're small and unobtrusive. I really would recommend you focus on something else if you want to hone your shaping skills further. The number of shaping exercises in existence is virtually endless, and the Academy Library has quite a collection of them. Stone crumbling and north finding exercises are extremely useful, for instance, but they're typically not taught to most students due to time constraints." "Stone crumbling and north finding?" asked Zorian. "Stone crumbling consists of placing a pebble on your palm and then causing it to disintegrate into dust. That's a flawless result, however, and most people are satisfied if they can get it to fall apart into sand-like grains. It's a useful exercise for those who plan to heavily focus on alteration spells, since the first step when restructuring matter is nearly always to break apart the existing state. North finding is an exercise for diviners, involving the use of a dummy compass to locate magnetic north. Those of sufficient skill don't even need the compass, they simply feel where the north is at all times." "Those do sound useful," agreed Zorian. "I'll definitely try to learn those. Still, are you sure you can't help me with my people levitating problem?" Ilsa gave him an annoyed look. "You're still not ready to give up on that? Why are so many talented students so intent on wasting their time on useless pranks?" Zorian was about to object but then realized she was right. He was essentially trying to prank Kiriel. Ilsa reached out and snatched the book out of the air, causing Zorian to blink in surprise. He was still levitating it? After a second of introspection he realized that yes, he kept the book in the air throughout the entire exchange. He stopped spinning it and it no longer glowed, but apparently levitating an object over his palm was so easy for him now that he barely even registered doing it. Huh. His pondering was cut off when Ilsa threw the book on the table where it hit the wood with a deafening boom. She smirked at his surprise and gestured him to pay attention. "Like I said, there is no manual for this," she said. "And I never tried something so foolish either. So keep in mind that this is all pure speculation on my part, all right?" Zorian nodded eagerly. "The first thing I would do if I were in your place would be to stop relying on hands to levitate things," Ilsa said. "Focusing the magic through your hands makes the process way easier, yes, but only for a certain category of tasks. In a very real way, levitating an object over your palm isn't true non-structured magic. The palm provides a reference point for the effect, which both guides it and limits it. If you mastered everything in Empeton's book, you are familiar with fixed position levitation?" Zorian took a pen from a box full of them next to him and made it float above his palm. After a second, he moved his hand left and right, but the pen remained hovering in the exact same spot in the air he left it in, stubbornly refusing to follow the movements of his hand. A flawless demonstration, Ilsa praised. But let me ask you this, does it not appear to you that fixed position levitation achieves its goal in a kind of convoluted, roundabout way? Why do you need an advanced shaping exercise to achieve something a simple levitate object spell can do as a matter of routine? Before he could answer, Ilsa reached out and twisted his palm sideways. The pen instantly fell to the table. Because using your hand as a reference point limits what you can do with the mana you're shaping, Ilsa said, leaning back. Even though the pen appeared independent of your hand, it was only an illusion. A pretty baffling one too. Why would you bother? You basically put a limiter on the mana flow, making it dependent on the position of your palm, and then tried to subvert that very same limiter to decouple it from your palm. The book Ilsa threw on the table to catch his attention suddenly rose into the air. Ilsa didn't make a single movement, but he knew she was responsible. Not the least because she was grinning at him. Look, she said. No hands. Of course, this is just about the limit of what I can do without using any sort of gesture to help me out with the shaping. It is a hard skill to learn, but you probably won't need it in its pure form simply for the sake of this project of yours. You just need to reduce the degree to which your shaping depends on your hands and make it more flexible. Twisting your hand sideways shouldn't have caused the pen to plummet down like a rock. You just surprised me, Zorian huffed indignantly. I don't usually lose control of my mana that easily. I stand by my words, Ilsa said with good-natured smile. You are very impressive for a student, or even a regular mage, but you have a long way to go if you want to join the ranks of the truly great. But anyway, if and when you get some progress on that, you should try levitating some living being smaller than a human. Much smaller. Try insects for a start, then progress on mice and so on. All in all, it should only take you, about 4 years or so. If she thought he would be discouraged by that, she was sorely mistaken. Not only did he have his doubts about the accuracy of her predicted timetable, he really didn't have anything better to do at the moment. I guess I better get started then, was all he said. Break. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as a sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. Good morning, brother, an annoyingly cheerful voice sounded right on top of him. Morning, morning, morning. Zorian stared blankly at the ceiling above him, at a loss for words. That prediction he had made? He lost track of how many restarts had passed in the meantime, but the number was way bigger than 15. And nothing had changed since then. Rare was a restart that lasted more than 3 days, and none of them went on for more than 5. Whatever Zack was doing, it was lethally hard and Zack was too much of a stubborn ass to give up any time soon. Zorian? Are you all right? Come on, I didn't hit you that hard. Up. Zorian ignored Kiriel, who was currently pinching his side with ever-increasing vigor, staring at the ceiling while suppressing so much as a twitch. The pain was negligible compared to a couple of particularly nasty pain spells Kirin used on him during one of their resistance training sessions. Thankfully, Kirin never used any of them more than once per restart. Kiriel slapped him a few times and then pretended she was going to punch him in the face. When he didn't react to that, her fist stopped just before it would impact with his face. Zorian? Kiriel said, actually sounding somewhat concerned. Seriously, are you okay? Slowly, mechanically, Zorian turned his head to meet Kiriel's eyes, keeping his expression as blank as possible. After a few seconds of silent staring, he slowly opened his mouth and screamed at her. She recoiled at the sudden outburst and let out a girlish scream of her own as her retreat caused her to tumble off the bed. He watched for a few moments as Kiriel began to turn red from rage, and then he could no longer restrain himself. He started laughing. He kept laughing even as Kiriel's little fists started to rain down blows on him. Break. Zorian's eyes abruptly shot open as a sharp pain erupted from his stomach. His whole body convulsed, buckling against the object that fell on him, and suddenly he was wide awake, not a trace of drowsiness in his mind. Good M dash. With an inarticulate yell, Zorian flipped Kiriel on her back and mercilessly started tickling her. Her shrieks reverberated through the entire house until Mother came up to his room and made him stop. Break. Good morning, brother. Morning, morning, morning. A short silence ensued, broken only by the rustling of Zorian's blankets as Kiriel shifted impatiently on top of them. Kiri, he finally said. I think I'm starting to hate you. He was exaggerating, of course, but gods, was this becoming annoying as hell. Amusingly, Kiriel actually appeared concerned by his proclamation. I'm sorry, she said, hurriedly wriggling herself off the bed. I was just dash. Whoa, 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 interrupted Zorian, fixing Kiriel with a mock glare. My little sister apologizing? That doesn't happen. Who are you and what did you do to Kiriel? Kiriel's appeared dumbfounded for a moment, but her expression quickly grew stormy as she realized what he was implying. Jerk. She huffed, childishly stomping her foot for emphasis. I do too apologize. When I'm wrong. When you're backed into a corner, corrected Zorian. You must want some pretty big favor out of me if you're this desperate to remain in my good graces. What's the story? He really did want to know, too. She gave no indication she wanted something from him all those times he had been through this, yet it must be pretty important to her if she was willing to apologize to get it. That didn't make much sense. Kiriel wasn't really a shy girl, and had no problems with making her wishes known in the past. For a moment he was tempted to conclude he misinterpreted the situation, but then Kiriel looked away and started mumbling something intelligibly. What was that? He prodded. Mother wants to talk to you, Kiriel said, still avoiding his eyes.
Yeah.
Well, Mother can wait, said Zorian. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what you want from me. She pouted at him for a moment before taking a big breath in preparation. Please take me with you to Syoria, she said, folding her hands in front of her in a pleading gesture. I've always wanted to go there and I don't want to go to Koth with Mother in. Zorian tuned her out, shocked at the revelation. How could he have been so blind? He knew there was something strange about the ease with which he could convince Mother not to make him take Kiriel with him, but he didn't want to question a favorable outcome and so ignored it. Of course it was easy, she didn't want him to take her either. It was Kiriel who wanted to go. Mother was just making a token attempt so she could tell Kiriel she tried and failed. No wonder Kiriel always seemed so sullen on the way to the train station. Zorian? Please? He shook his head to clear his thoughts and smiled at Kiriel, who was looking at him with bated breath and hope in her eyes. Now how could he say no to that? That it would ruin Mother's schemes was simply a bonus. Of course I'll take you with me, he said. Really? So long as you behave dash. Yes. 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 Kiriel yelled happily, jumping around in excitement. He could never understand this boundless energy she had. He was never that exuberant, even as a child. I knew you'd say yes. Mother said you'd refuse for sure. Zorian looked away in embarrassment. Right, he said lamely. Shows what she knows. Shall I assume then that you already have Mother's permission for this plan?
Yeah.
Kiriel confirmed. She said she was fine with it so long as you agree. Oh, that diabolical woman, saying no but making him take the blame for it. Looking back at it, the plan was almost magnificent in execution, she even gave him a lecture on proper attire and family honor to put him into a foul mood before springing the question. With a sigh he put on his glasses and got out of bed. "I'm going to the bathroom." A second later his brain caught up with what he said and he froze. Looking back at Kiriel, he was surprised to see she wasn't trying to race him to his destination and was instead looking at him in confusion. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," Zorian said, before walking out of the room. He supposed the only reason she did that in your average restart was to make him confront Mother as soon as possible. A poor move, since it only made him more annoyed at her, but she was only a kid and probably didn't think things through all that well. It was going to be an interesting restart. Chapter 014. The Sister Effect. After telling Kiriel to pack her things for the trip, a task she immediately set off to accomplish, he filled his room with multicolored orbs of light and went down to the kitchen to face Mother. The light show was something he did in every restart, since he wasn't sure Ilsa would agree to arrange additional tutoring for him unless she stumbled on it. Not that it did him much good, since these short loops he was stuck in ceased too soon for him to gain anything from it, but he kept doing it regardless. Just in case. Who knew, maybe this particular restart would be the one where Zack stopped dying so soon. Mother studied him like a hawk as he descended down the stairs, looking for any flaw in his appearance she could criticize. He knew from experience that she would find something to complain about, but he didn't really care. He was dressed well enough to avoid a protracted lecture about family honor, and that was all that mattered. For a while he had tried to use his time loop given foreknowledge to appear perfect, but that hadn't worked on her. Talk about high standards. Maybe she really was deliberately trying to annoy him to make sure he'd refuse to take Kiriel with him? Sitting at the table, he pushed the cold porridge to the side and started eating apples instead, ignoring Mother's annoyance at spurning her food. After she had realized he wasn't going to say anything, she released a dramatic sigh and launched into one of her long-winded monologues, dancing around the real issue she wanted to talk to him about, the possibility of him taking Kiriel with him to Syoria. "Now that I think about it," Mother said, finally deciding to get to the point, "I never told you I'm going to Koth with your father to visit Daimen, did I?" "You want me to take Kiri with me to Syoria," Zorian guessed. What?" She blinked, surprised for a second. Then she shook her head slightly and sighed. "She told you," she concluded. "Yup," Zorian confirmed. "So much for picking the right moment like we agreed upon," Mother said. "I guess I should go and comfort her." "Why would she need comforting?" Zorian asked. I said yes. She was ecstatic. "She's in her room right now, packing her things." She looked at him like he had suddenly started reciting classical poetry. Zorian didn't know whether to feel guilty or annoyed. Was it really that weird for him to agree to this? Before he had enrolled into the academy, he had spent more time with the little imp than anyone else in the family, Mother included. He was more of a parent to Kiriel than she and Father ever were. Really, if Kiriel had just told him she wanted to go herself instead of having Mother speak for her, he probably would have agreed to it after some arguing, even before the time loop. Annoyed. He was definitely feeling annoyed with her. He leveled a challenging glare at Mother, daring her to say something. "What?" he snapped after a few seconds of mutual staring. "Nothing," she said, schooling her expression into something unreadable. "I'm just surprised, that's all. I'm glad you're finally starting to think about someone other than yourself. Have you thought about housing?" "I have," confirmed Zorian. "It depends on whether I'll have to pay for the arrangements from my own pocket or if you'll give me extra money for rent." "Now you're just being insulting," his mother snapped. "Of course we'll give you rent money. When did we ever make you pay for essential living expenses by yourself? How much do you need?" As if her own remark about him finally thinking about someone other than himself wasn't just as insulting. He was just responding in kind. But yes, Zorian grudgingly admitted she was right, his parents had many flaws, but they would never let him go hungry or homeless unless they were completely bankrupt themselves. He was the disfavored son, but a son nonetheless. They spent the next several minutes discussing living expenses in Saoria, arguing back and forth about how much money he would need to rent some place and feed Kiriel. He, of course, favored larger sums, and he knew enough about Saoria's economy to give weight to his arguments. Mother made no secret about her surprise at his knowledge of rent prices in various districts of Saoria. Apparently she was under the impression such down-to-earth knowledge didn't interest him. Zorian decided not to explain he was keeping track of rent prices so he could move away from home at a moment's notice, instead trying to change the subject. He was not very effective in that regard. Mother was stubbornly fixated on that little factoid, but Ilsa's arrival saved him from her interrogation. Mother quickly excused herself, saying she was going to help Kiriel pack, but Zorian still led Ilsa back to his room when she asked him where they could have some privacy. He had to show her all those lights he accidentally forgot to dispel, after all. At first the talk proceeded in a fairly standard fashion, but the usual routine he was used to was quickly shattered when they reached the topic of habitation. According to this, began Ilsa, momentarily shaking a piece of paper she was holding, you lived in academy housing for the past 2 years. I assume you intend to do the same this year, too? Actually, no, answered Zorian. I'm taking my younger sister with me this year, so I can't do that. Unless the academy makes allowances for such things? It doesn't, Ilsa said. I figured, Zorian said, not really surprised by that. We'll just stay in a hotel for a few days until I find a place to rent. Ilsa gave him a strange look that Zorian had trouble deciphering. You don't have a place reserved already, she asked. No, Zorian said. The decision was a bit abrupt, so I didn't have any time to make proper preparations. Why? I may have a solution for you in regards to that, Ilsa said, straightening her posture into a slightly more serious stance. You mean you know a place I could rent? Zorian asked. Ilsa nodded. That's fortunate, I guess. What do you have in mind? First of all, I want to emphasize that what I'm about to offer you has nothing to do with the Saoria Royal Academy of Magical Arts, Ilsa cautioned. This is something strictly between the two of us, understand? Okay, said Zorian cautiously. He was getting slightly concerned now, but he sensed no deception or ill intent from Ilsa. He waited to hear what she was offering. A friend of mine is renting rooms at very reasonable rates, Ilsa began. After several minutes of questioning and reading between the lines, Zorian decided he would give Ilsa's friend a chance. Her reasonable rates were a tad expensive, but it was manageable. Ilsa also suggested her friend loved children and would be all too happy to take care of Kiriel while he was at class, which would be worth every piece he paid for the place if actually true. After that, the topic shifted to his choice of mentor, or rather, the fact that he wasn't allowed to choose one, and his choice of electives. Since he had pretty much tried out every elective he was even remotely interested in by now, his choices were pretty constant at this point: botany, astronomy, and human anatomy. He chose them solely because he knew for a fact that teachers of those particular subjects didn't care in the slightest if he chose not to come to class, and because Akoja didn't choose any of them as her electives, and thus wasn't aware he was skipping them. The moment Ilsa went back to the academy, Kiriel came barreling down the stairs like a herd of elephants, ignoring Mother's admonishments about running inside the house. No doubt she had finished packing a while ago and had been simply waiting for Ilsa to leave so she could come out. I'm ready, she grinned happily. So you have everything packed? Asked Zorian. Yup, she nodded. What about my books? Asked Zorian. Why would I pack your books? She scowled. You can do that yourself, lazy ass. Well, you did take them from my room and hide them under your bed, Zorian remarked. Oh. Her eyes widened in understanding. Those books. I guess I kind of forgot to give those back to you. I'll put them back in your room, okay? What are you two talking about? Mother asked as she approached. Nothing, Kiriel said in a slightly panicky voice, whirring quickly to face Mother. I just forgot something, that's all. I'll be right back. She quickly bolted up the stairs, ignoring Mother's repeated admonishment about not running in the house. Zorian looked at her retreating form with narrowed eyes. Why was Kiriel so frightened about Mother finding out she had been taking books out of his room? It was hardly the first time she helped herself to his things, and Mother never cared before. There was something of significance hidden in that seemingly innocuous reaction, he just knew it. He was starting to think he didn't know Kiriel half as well as he thought he did. Break. I'm bored. Zorian opened his eyes and glared at his little sister. He couldn't close his eyes for more than a minute without her saying something or accidentally kicking him in the knees with her pointy little shoes. And he had thought the station announcer was annoying. I can tell, he said, rolling his eyes. What do you want me to do about it? Play a game with me, she said hopefully. Haven't we done enough of that already? He sighed. There are only so many times I can beat you at hangman before it gets boring. You were cheating, she protested. Asphyxiation isn't even a real word. What? Of course it is, he shot back. You're just Dash. Liar, she interrupted. Whatever, Zorian scoffed. It's not like that was the only game where I won. So you admit you cheated in that one, she concluded triumphantly. Zorian opened his mouth to retort before he closed it again. Why am I arguing about this? He asked out loud, though it was directed more towards himself than Kiri. A sharp crackling sound that always heralded the voice of the station announcer stopped any further argument they may have had. Now stopping in Corsa, a disembodied voice echoed. A crackling sound again. I repeat, now stopping in Corsa. Thank you. Oh, thank the gods, Zorian mumbled. Not only did arriving in Corsa mean 3/4 of the journey was over, it also meant someone was going to join them in their compartment, thus giving Kiriel someone else to annoy. Someone other than Ibri, though, he purposely avoided his usual compartment to ensure she and Kiri would never meet, since he had a suspicion a conversation between them wouldn't end well. Kiri didn't like Fortov any more than Zorian did, and she was a lot less tactful about it. So many people, Kiri remarked, watching the throng at the train station through the window. Are those all students like you? Most of them.
Yeah,
Zorian said. Though not all of them go to the same school as I do. There is more than one academy in Cyoria. I thought mages were rarer than this, she said. Mom says you need to be really smart to be one. Do you think I could be a mage too one day? Sure, he shrugged. Really, she asked, a mixture of excitement and suspicion radiating from her voice and posture. Zorian supposed she half expected him to use his agreement as a setup for a mean-spirited joke or something along those lines. Yes, he confirmed. I don't see why you couldn't. You seem to be doing well enough in school from what I heard, so I don't see why your intelligence would be a problem. And it's not like our parents can't afford to send you somewhere, even if it isn't Cyoria. Kiriel didn't answer, choosing instead to look through the window in silence and pointedly refusing to look him in the eye. He was just about to ask her what's wrong when the door to the compartment slid open, distracting him. Bjorn Ivarin, the boy introduced himself. Can I sit here? Zorian waved him in without a word. This was the guy who inspired him to seek employment in the library the last time they had spoken with each other. The boy had been quite talkative back then, so he should be perfect. Even if he was disinclined to talk to someone so young, he doubted Kiriel would let him ignore her, and he seemed too polite to just plain snub her to her face. Hopefully he would keep Kiriel busy till the rest of the journey. I'm Kiriel Kaczynski, his sister promptly introduced herself, and that's my brother Zorian. Are you a student like Zorian? Can you do magic?
Well,
yes, Byrne said, torn between desire to ask about the surname and a desire to be polite and answer Kiriel's question. Politeness won in the end. I'm only a first year, though, so it's not like I have anything to brag with. Sadly for Byrne, he would have to wait for a while before he could ask about the surname. Kiriel was on a roll, and promptly assaulted the poor kid with every question imaginable. Zorian soon found out that Byrne was an only child of 2 first-generation mages from Corsa, and that his family had pretty high expectations of him. Byrne was as excited to be away from his overbearing parents as he was about learning magic. That, at least, was something Zorian could empathize with. 3 older brothers, huh? Byrne laughed. Poor you. Though. I kind of wish I had a few older brothers myself. My parents could have someone else to focus on every once in a while. I know what you mean, Kiriel said. Ever since Zorian started going to the academy, Mother has no one but me to pay attention to. It sucks. Zorian flinched in sympathy. He hadn't thought of that, but it shed a great deal of light on Kiriel's behavior for the past 2 years. Without Zorian there to act like a figurative lightning rod for Mother's criticism, Kiriel's time at home probably took a sharp turn for the worse in his absence. A part of him was pleased that the little imp was forced to experience some of what he went through in his daily interactions with their family, but he mostly thought she didn't deserve something like that. So, I've been meaning to ask, said Byrne. Your last name is pretty distinctive. Not that many Kaczynskis walking around. Are you related to Daimen Kaczynski by any chance? He's our brother, Kiriel said. Really? Asked Byrne excitedly. You know, I haven't heard anything about him in a while. What is he up to currently? He's in Koth, Kiriel said. I think he found something in the jungle, but I don't know. I don't really talk to him all that often. He's always traveling. You're more likely to find out about him in the newspapers than by talking to me. Zorian knows him better than I do. Zorian shot Kiriel a quick glare for putting him on the spot like that, and on the topic of Daimen no less. The little imp just stuck her tongue at him. Humph. Daimen and I don't get along, Zorian said bluntly. There is not much I can tell you about him that Kiri hasn't already. Oh, Byrne said, obviously disappointed. He let out a slightly strained laugh, trying to dispel the somewhat awkward atmosphere that descended on the compartment. And here I thought I would get some inside stories about one of my heroes. Though I suppose in a way I did, didn't I? It's a bit sad that he doesn't have time for his family. Hummed Zorian noncommittally. The rest of the journey was uneventful, except that Byrne decided to tag along with them for a while after they disembarked. Both Byrne and Kiriel were awed, and more than a little intimidated, by the sheer size and activity of Scioria's train station, and Zorian decided to be nice and give them a brief tour around the place. The tour turned out to be not as brief as he had intended, however, because Kiriel insisted on browsing the stores. He tried to tell her that every shop in and around the train station sold massively overpriced merchandise, because they could, thanks to their favorable location, and that he wouldn't be buying her anything, but that didn't deter her in the slightest. She was just looking. Byrne, for some unfathomable reason, sided with Kiri. He liked browsing stores too, apparently. Madness. Since they had wasted so much time, however, the rain had already started falling by the time they were ready to depart. Byrne had no umbrella, of course, and even if he had, the amount of luggage he carried would make a trek through the rain a problematic endeavor. Zorian reluctantly offered to help, the boy looked so miserable at this sudden turn of events that Zorian didn't have the heart to just walk away. Besides, Kiriel wouldn't let him do that, and he didn't want to make a scene by dragging her away so they could be on their way. "I really appreciate this, you know?" Bjorn said, curiously brushing his fingers against the dome of the rain barrier spell surrounding them. "I don't know what I would have done if it weren't for you. It doesn't seem like the rain is going to stop anytime soon." "For the last time, it's all right," Zorian sighed. "Really, I live to help." Bjorn covertly mouthed thank you to Kiriel, who was unabashedly playing with the rain barrier by sticking her arms and legs outside the protective dome and then drawing them back in, causing her to give him a thumbs up. Apparently the boy knew whom to thank for his good fortune. Humph. If he ran out of mana halfway to their new home after getting Bjorn to the academy, it would be on her head. Rain barrier was quite draining, and he had to enlarge it so it would cover all three of them plus the floating disc that carried their combined luggage. "This spell is awesome," Kiriel declared. "How hard is it? Do you think you could teach me how to cast this one?" "I won't tell anyone." "Oh please," Zorian snorted. "You can't even feel your mana, much less shape it." "It's not a question of legality, it's a question of skill. It would take months if you're some kind of genius, a year or two otherwise. Just wait until you enroll into a magic school yourself, okay?" Kiriel immediately deflated. In the end they managed to deposit Bjorn to the safety of the Academy's own rain wards without issues before going their own way. In fact, they nearly made it to their destination before Zorian ran out of mana, causing the rain barrier to wink out of existence. Emphasis on nearly. He hoped Ilsa's friend wasn't sensitive about people bringing water into the house. "Break. You should have waited. Honestly, what possessed you to walk around in this horrid weather? Kids these days think they're invincible." Zorian rolled his eyes at his host's scolding, not hiding his reaction in the slightest since she was busy rummaging through a set of drawers and wasn't really facing him. The rain would have continued throughout the entire night, though he couldn't exactly tell her how he knew that, so waiting it out hadn't been an option. Besides, they would have made it just fine if Kiriel hadn't been so stubborn about getting Bjorn to the academy grounds first. And also, it's not like their brief run through the rain was all that traumatic. So really, why was she getting so worked up about it? His thoughts were interrupted by a towel hitting him in the face. "There. You can use that to dry your hair," she said. "I'll go see if your sister needs any help. You just hope she doesn't get sick from this or you'll be hearing from me about this, you hear?" "She's not a sugar cube," Zorian mumbled. "She's not going to fall apart just because she got a little wet." Either that was spoken too softly for her to hear or she decided to ignore him, but either way she just walked past him and left the room. Unconcerned, Zorian sat down on a nearby chair, studying the place they were in. Their landlord, one Amaya Kurashka, was a lively middle-aged woman that quickly ushered them in when she found them, soaking wet, on her doorstep. She hadn't even asked for their identities before she had done that. It took an introduction by Zorian until she realized they actually had a reason beyond getting out of the rain when they knocked on her door. Zorian was tempted to deliver his own scolding to the woman about naivete and letting strangers into the house, but unlike some people, he chose not to be difficult. She seemed nice enough, all things considered. At the very least she didn't appear to be one of those landlords that tried to bleed their tenants of everything they could part with, though it was hard to be sure this soon. The part that irked him a little was that Amaya seemed to consider them living at her place a done deal already. He only agreed to check the place out, nothing more. Once Amaya returned with Kiriel, who had changed her clothes and mostly dried her hair at this point, and seemed completely unaffected by the fact she had been running through the pouring rain less than an hour ago, they started talking. Zorian had to steer the conversation back to the topic of their stay every once in a while, since both Amaya and Kiriel were content to let the conversation wander around if he let them. He also had to kick Kiriel a few times under the table to get her to shut up. Ilsa had told him never to broach the topic of marriage and husbands in front of Amaya for some unspecified reason. Zorian liked it when people respected his privacy, so he was content to do the same of Amaya, and had warned Kiriel to abide by the rule as well. Something she evidently had problems with, due to her tendency to babble. Their arrangement was not exactly to his liking, in all honesty. Amaya's house clearly hadn't been designed for rent. It was a normal, if large, family home that had a bunch of empty sleeping rooms on the second floor. Zorian and Kiriel would be getting one of them, and they would be sharing the rest of the house facilities with Amaya and 2 other tenants that were scheduled to arrive in the next few days. That was a lot less privacy than he was comfortable with. Not to mention that their room only had 1 bed, meaning he would have to sleep together with Kiriel. Zorian had actually spent a few nights with Kiriel when she had been younger, and knew for a fact that Kiriel was a restless sleeper and a cover hog, so he had big issues with that. Thankfully, they were the only tenants at the moment, so Amaya allowed him to claim an additional room for himself at no extra charge, with the stipulation that he move back in with Kiriel when she found a proper tenant for it. Zorian decided to quietly look into other places to rent tomorrow. Just in case. Break. Despite his novel living arrangements and Kiriel's presence, the next few days were fairly standard. He applied for the job at the library. He went to talk to Ilsa about advanced instruction and chose divination as a discipline he was interested in. He practiced various shaping exercises whenever he had some free time, concentrating mostly on the north-finding one since that exercise was supposed to help with divinations. Taven tracked him down, despite his change of residence, and Zorian notified her about the rumors about mind magic using giant spiders running around the sewers to make sure she'd survive the encounter. Despite his misgivings, he decided not to leave Amaya's place, since Amaya did a masterful job of keeping Kiriel happy and off his back. For her part, Kiriel was remarkably well behaved. She spent a lot of her time drawing things. He didn't even know she liked to draw. She never did it at home as far as he knew. Maybe the trip had inspired her to take up a hobby? In any case, once those first couple of days had passed, everything just went off the rails. For one thing, the restart hadn't ended at that point and instead just kept going, which was noteworthy by itself. More importantly, however, he was once again asked by Ilsa to greet Kale and his daughter at Sayoria's main train station, only to find out that Kale had also rented a room at Amaya's place. For pretty much the same reason that he had, too, Ilsa had recommended the place. So now he was living in the same house with his little sister, a teenage Morlock and his daughter, and a landlord that didn't really act like a landlord. He was finally going to meet his divination instructor. Svim would be throwing marbles at him again come next Friday. Ilsa apparently visited her friend's house on a regular basis, and Amaya invited Taven to eat with them next Sunday while she was trying to talk Zorian into following her into the sewers. Clearly this was not going to be your average restart. I still feel like I'm taking advantage of you, Kale said, pouring a fistful of blue powder into a transparent glass container. And I still can't imagine why, Zorian said, not taking his eyes off the tiny blue mushrooms he was currently grinding into more powder. I stock your lab with ingredients, and you let me be your assistant while you do your work. You get to save a little money on reagents and I get some practical alchemical experience. What on earth is predatorial about that? Here. He thrust the powdered mushrooms to the white-haired boy, who sighed in defeat and went back to work. Zorian took the time to look around the workshop without being too blatant about it. Kale's workshop was pretty amazing considering it was really just a basement that Amaya donated to the boy so he could convert it to his purposes. Setting it up was the first thing Kale did after moving into the place, with Amaya being surprisingly unconcerned about a mere academy student working with dangerous magical concoctions right under her home. Ilsa assured me Kale knows what he's doing, she said. Well, he probably did, but still. As for equipment, it was loaned to Kale by the Academy authorities. According to Kale, it was rather outdated, but the Morlock couldn't afford to be picky and was lucky to get anything at all. I just don't think the price of restocking my workshop is worth whatever experience you're going to get, Kale said, pouring boiling water into the powder-filled container and adding some weird little black balls that Zorian didn't recognize. In fact, considering how good you are at this, I should probably be paying you for the help. Don't worry about it, Zorian repeated, hoping this time it would stick. He couldn't exactly tell the boy that his savings account would spontaneously refill when the loop restarted, so it was hard to explain why money wasn't too important for him. Overall, his interaction with Kale was a lot friendlier this time around. Grudgingly, he had to admit Kiriel had a lot to do with it. She hit it off with Kana pretty quickly, despite the other girl being practically a baby, which seemed to put Kale at ease with both of them. After that, the two of them discovered they got along pretty well, and Zorian decided to help the Morlock with his alchemy and learn something at the same time. Which led to their current situation. This whole situation is terribly strange, Kale said after a minute of silence. Not in a bad way, though. Kana is the happiest I have seen her in a while. I really am grateful to your sister for everything she has done for her, by the way. To be honest, I'm not sure how long it's going to last, Zorian admitted. For now she finds Kana cute, and probably finds it pleasing to have someone pay attention to her with such rapt attention. She tends to get bored really quickly, though. And in any case, she's only in Cyoria temporarily while my family is off visiting my brother in Koth. Well, that's too bad, Kale sighed. Then he smirked at Zorian. Though I supposed you'll be relieved when she finally leaves. Well, who knows, Zorian said. We'll see how things go. She's not so bad right now, so maybe she won't be a total pest like she usually is. I'm hoping some of your daughter's attitude will rub off on her in time. Oh, that would be such a pity, Kale said. It would be a shame for such a lively girl to lose her spark of life. I myself wish Kana had some of that boundless enthusiasm. Shall we trade, then, offered Zorian. No, Kale snorted. Fetch me the water celery and be quiet for a while. I need to concentrate on this part. And so Zorian stood in silence and watched Kale work, and thought about what the rest of the month would bring.